It was a cold morning at Fort Lancaster. The sky was pale gray, and a thin mist floated above the training grounds. Soldiers from the 23rd Infantry Division were finally coming back after a long and exhausting 10-day field mission. Their boots were muddy, their uniforms wrinkled and dusty, and their faces showed how tired they were. Some laughed weakly, some stayed quiet, but everyone was just happy to be back at base. The air smelled of fuel, sweat, and the relief of survival. Among the soldiers walking back into the compound was Sergeant Emily Carter, a woman in her late 20s with sharp eyes and a calm face. She wasn't the loud type. People said she was one of the toughest in her unit, but she never bragged about it. Emily always kept to herself, did her duty, and never complained. Even when the weather was rough or the mission seemed impossible, she stayed focused and led her team with quiet strength. As the soldiers lined up for roll call, General Robert Hayes stepped out of his office. He was a tall, gray-haired man, respected by everyone on base. He had served for more than 25 years, and though his voice was firm, he was known for caring deeply about his troops. He walked past the rows of soldiers, his boots crunching on the gravel, nodding at them with pride. But when his eyes landed on Sergeant Carter, he slowed down. Something didn't look right. Her uniform was neat, her posture perfect, but there was a faint mark on the side of her face, just below her eye. At first, it looked like dirt, maybe a scrape from the mission. But when she turned her head slightly, the mark caught the light. It wasn't dirt. It was a bruise. The general's expression changed. It was subtle but sharp. He'd seen soldiers come back with cuts and injuries before, but this didn't look like one from battle. It was too fresh, too out of place. His eyes followed her movements. Emily didn't flinch. She stood tall, staring straight ahead like nothing was wrong. The debrief started. The officers discussed mission outcomes, equipment losses, and upcoming schedules. Everyone seemed eager to leave for the mess hall. But General Hayes's mind wasn't fully there. He kept thinking about Emily's face. A small bruise shouldn't bother him this much, yet something about it did. He had seen the way she kept avoiding eye contact, how she pressed her lips together when her name was called. It wasn't just exhaustion, it was something heavier. When the meeting ended, the general dismissed everyone. "Get some rest, soldiers," he said, his voice echoing across the yard. "You've earned it." As the troops began to walk away, he called out, "Sergeant Carter." Emily stopped immediately and turned back. "Yes, sir." "Walk with me," the general said simply. They walked a short distance toward the side of the building where it was quieter. The morning breeze was cool, carrying the faint scent of coffee and diesel fuel. The general looked at her closely now. The bruise was more visible under the sunlight. Purplish, tender, clearly not something caused by a helmet strap or a training fall. "Rough mission?" he asked, keeping his voice casual. Emily nodded slightly. "Yes, sir. Just some bad luck on the field." "Bad luck, huh?" Hayes said softly, studying her eyes. She didn't meet his gaze. "That's not from a fall, is it?" he added. Emily's jaw tightened. "Permission to speak freely, sir?" "Granted. It's nothing serious. I don't want to cause trouble." That answer confirmed his suspicion. It wasn't an accident. Hayes took a deep breath. "Sergeant, I've been doing this for a long time," he said slowly. "I've seen what a training injury looks like. That's not one." For a moment, Emily didn't move. Her throat tightened, and her eyes flickered as if she wanted to say something, but she didn't. Instead, she straightened her back and said quietly, "I'm fine, sir. It won't happen again." The general frowned. "It won't happen again?" He repeated her words, realizing they revealed more than she intended. "Sergeant Carter, if there's something going on, I need to know. You're not just a soldier here, you're one of my people." Emily's hands clenched at her sides. She wanted to trust him, but fear held her back. She had worked too hard to be respected, to be seen as capable. She couldn't let one moment of weakness ruin that. So she forced a small smile and said, "Thank you for your concern, sir, but it's really okay." General Hayes didn't push her further. He knew if he pressed too hard, she might shut down completely. "All right," he said finally, though his tone was heavy with doubt. "Get some rest, Sergeant. That's an order." She saluted, turned sharply, and walked away. Hayes watched her until she disappeared around the corner of the barracks. He stayed there for a moment, his thoughts uneasy. Something about the bruise, the way she avoided questions, the quiet fear in her eyes. It didn't sit right with him. He had seen soldiers break from war, but this wasn't that kind of pain. As he stood there, the wind rustled through the flag above the base, and the morning sun began to burn through the fog. The general sighed, feeling a weight on his chest. He didn't know what had happened to Emily Carter, but he was certain of one thing: this wasn't over. Whatever she was hiding, it was something she shouldn't have to face alone. That small bruise on her face was more than just a mark. It was a silent cry for help, and though she wouldn't say it yet, General Hayes had already made up his mind. He would find out the truth. After the debriefing ended, most of the soldiers walked quickly toward the mess hall, laughing and talking. They were starving after days of eating cold rations in the field. The mood around the base was lighter now, full of relief and chatter. But General Hayes didn't share their calmness. His eyes followed Sergeant Emily Carter as she quietly slipped away from the group, heading toward the armory to return her gear. Something about that bruise on her face kept pulling at his thoughts. He wasn't the kind of man who ignored things that didn't add up. Years in service had trained him to notice small details. Shaky hands, forced smiles, things soldiers tried to hide. Emily's behavior didn't fit her usual self. He had seen her lead missions before. She was always alert, confident, and straightforward. But now, she moved differently. Cautious, quieter than usual, as if she wanted to blend into the background. When she was done returning her rifle and vest, she started walking toward her barracks. That's when she heard his voice. "Sergeant Carter." She turned immediately. The general was standing a few feet away, his hands behind his back, his expression unreadable. "Yes, sir," she said, trying to keep her voice steady. "Walk with me." It wasn't a request. It was an order, but his tone wasn't harsh. It was calm, concerned. They walked together along the narrow path behind the headquarters building. The area was quiet, far from the noise of the other soldiers. The air was cool and still. The general finally stopped near a bench under a tree and faced her. "You did well out there," he began, his eyes on her. "Your team's report was clean. No major losses, good discipline." "Thank you, sir," Emily said politely, still standing straight. He nodded, but then his gaze softened. "But that bruise," he said, his voice lowering, "doesn't look like something you got during a mission." Emily froze. Her heart started beating faster. She had hoped he wouldn't bring it up again. "Just a small accident, sir," she replied quickly. "Got too close to a door when we were loading supplies. My fault." The general looked at her silently for a moment. He didn't believe her. "A door?" he repeated, one eyebrow lifting slightly. "That's an odd place for a door to hit, Sergeant." She felt her throat tighten. "It was nothing, sir," she said again, this time with more firmness. "Emily," he said quietly, dropping the formal tone for the first time. That alone surprised her. He rarely called soldiers by their first names. "You don't have to pretend with me. I've seen enough to know when someone's covering something up." She looked away, pretending to watch the trucks in the distance. "Sir, with respect, I'm fine. Really." But he wasn't convinced. The general took a slow breath, trying to choose his words carefully. "You remind me of someone," he said softly. "A young private I knew years ago, strong as steel. Never complained no matter what happened. One day, I noticed he was limping. Said it was nothing. Turned out he'd broken his foot a week earlier and kept marching on it. Do you know what that taught me?" Emily glanced at him, curious despite herself. "It taught me that the strongest soldiers are often the ones suffering the most," Hayes said, "because they think asking for help makes them weak." His words hit her like a quiet punch. For a second, her eyes flickered, and she almost said something, but she stopped herself. She wasn't ready. If she spoke now, everything she'd worked for might crumble. People would look at her differently, maybe even pity her. She couldn't stand that, so she simply nodded. "I appreciate your concern, sir." He studied her face for a long moment. Then he sighed, realizing she wasn't going to open up. "Not yet." "All right, Sergeant. You've earned your rest." "Dismissed." She saluted smartly and turned away, her boots crunching against the gravel. As she walked off, her mind was a storm of thoughts. She hated lying to him. The general wasn't just her superior. He was one of the few who genuinely cared about his soldiers. But she couldn't tell him, not now. It wasn't just about fear. It was about pride. She didn't want to be seen as the injured one, the one who couldn't handle herself. Behind her, General Hayes stood for a moment longer, staring after her. He knew that look, the one soldiers wore when they were hiding pain. He'd seen it on the battlefield, in hospitals, and sometimes in the mirror. It wasn't always physical. Sometimes the wounds went deeper than anyone could see. He muttered under his breath, "Something's not right here." As he walked back toward his office, his mind raced. He tried to convince himself it might be nothing, maybe an accident like she said. But his gut told him otherwise. A soldier as careful as Emily didn't just walk into a door. He remembered the way she tensed when he mentioned it, the quickness in her reply, and the flicker of fear in her eyes. He'd seen fear before. That wasn't fear of battle, that was fear of someone. Inside his office, the general sat down and looked out the window. Soldiers were laughing outside, cleaning their gear, living normally again. But his focus stayed on that one bruise. It wasn't just a mark. It was a message, one that Emily didn't dare speak. He leaned back in his chair and whispered to himself, "If she won't talk, I'll find out what's going on myself." At that same moment, Emily was sitting alone on her bunk, staring at her reflection in a small metal mirror. The bruise looked worse under the dim light. She touched it lightly and winced. Her eyes watered, but she blinked back the tears. She knew the general wouldn't let this go, and deep down, part of her was grateful. For the first time in a long while, someone had noticed. Someone cared. But she also knew that if the truth came out, things would get complicated and dangerous. So she took a deep breath, straightened her shoulders, and whispered to herself, "You can handle this, Emily. You always have." After that tense morning, Emily tried to go about her day like nothing had happened. She moved through the base with her usual precision, checking her gear, logging reports, and quietly observing her team. But inside, her mind was racing. The encounter with General Hayes had stirred something she hadn't expected, a mixture of fear and relief. Fear because she was afraid he would press her for the truth, and relief because, for the first time, someone had noticed. Someone had truly seen her. The general, on the other hand, wasn't someone who let things go easily. He spent the morning walking between the office and the training grounds, his thoughts constantly returning to Emily. That faint bruise on her cheek, the careful way she moved, and the almost invisible tremor in her hands kept replaying in his mind. Hayes had learned over decades in the military that injuries could tell a story, sometimes louder than words. And Emily's story was speaking volumes, even if she wasn't saying a single word. By mid-afternoon, the base had settled into a rhythm. Soldiers were cleaning their weapons, repairing vehicles, and sharing quiet jokes from the field. But Emily couldn't join in. She moved silently, her eyes scanning the area as if expecting trouble to appear from nowhere. Every glance in her direction from another soldier made her straighten up and control her expression. She had always been disciplined, but now every little movement felt exaggerated in her mind. Later, during a routine equipment check, she found herself paired with Lieutenant Perez, her squad leader. He was a friendly, observant man who had served with Emily for years. Normally, their interactions were lighthearted, filled with small jokes and casual orders. But today he noticed the bruise too. "Hey, Carter, that's a nasty one," he said quietly, lowering his voice so no one else could hear. Emily quickly turned her face and forced a smile. "It's nothing, sir. Just a scratch during training." Lieutenant Perez frowned, not convinced. "You sure? You don't look okay." "I'm fine," she insisted, keeping her tone firm. She wanted him to leave it at that. Over the years, she had learned a simple rule in the military. vulnerability could make you a target. Showing any weakness was dangerous. Even though she tried to focus on her tasks, her thoughts kept returning to the general's words. "You don't have to pretend here, Sergeant." Those words had been gentle but heavy with concern. Emily had grown up learning to handle problems on her own, and asking for help had always felt impossible. Yet the way Hayes had said them made her feel seen, almost like someone had reached through the walls she had built around herself. As the afternoon sun cast long shadows across the base, Emily returned to her barracks. She removed her gear and stared into the small mirror above her bunk. The bruise stood out even more in the soft light. Her fingers traced its edge lightly, and a small shiver ran through her. She hated that it existed, hated that it made her feel vulnerable, and hated that she couldn't hide it completely. Meanwhile, General Hayes had quietly called a few trusted officers into his office. He asked them to review mission logs, medical reports, and incident sheets from the past week. There was nothing indicating Emily had been injured in the field. That confirmed his suspicion. This wasn't an accident. It wasn't a normal training injury. Someone had hurt her, and it hadn't happened in combat. Hayes knew how delicate this situation was. The military was supposed to be a place of order and protection, but internal issues could be messy, and rumors could spread fast. If Emily had been hurt by another soldier, it could spark tension or even fear among the troops. He had to handle it carefully, but he also knew he couldn't ignore it. Later that evening, as Emily ate her solitary meal in the mess hall, she noticed the general walking past. Their eyes met for a brief moment, and he nodded slightly. It was a small gesture, but it gave her an unexpected sense of comfort. He wasn't angry, and he wasn't judging her. He had noticed her pain without forcing her to speak. For the first time in days, she felt a flicker of hope. Someone might actually help her, even if she wasn't ready to tell the full story. After the meal, Emily returned to her bunk and wrote quietly in her journal. Writing had always been her way of thinking clearly, of sorting out emotions she couldn't voice. She wrote about the field mission, about the small victories and challenges, and cautiously about the bruise. She didn't describe what had happened to cause it, but she let herself acknowledge the pain and fear it brought. As night fell and the base grew quiet, Emily lay on her bunk staring at the ceiling. She thought about the general's eyes, the concern in his voice, and the possibility that maybe, just maybe, she wasn't alone in this. Yet a part of her remained cautious. Trust had to be earned, and her experiences had taught her that revealing too much could be dangerous. Meanwhile, in his office, General Hayes was reviewing files and thinking about Emily. He knew that someone had hurt her, and that they might still be nearby. The thought made his jaw tighten. He wasn't the kind of officer who allowed injustice to continue unnoticed. He had spent his career protecting soldiers, and now it was his responsibility to ensure Emily's safety. He leaned back in his chair, staring out the window at the quiet base. The sun had set, and a soft wind blew through the trees. He whispered to himself, "She's hiding something, but I'll find out, and I'll make sure she's safe." In that quiet moment, the base felt still, but both Emily and the general carried a tension that couldn't be ignored. She was trying to survive silently, and he was quietly determined to protect her. Though they were not yet ready to face the truth together, the connection had begun. And that connection, built on observation, concern, and unspoken understanding, would soon become the key to confronting the danger that Emily had been forced to endure. That night, the base was quiet. The usual clatter of boots and the chatter of soldiers had faded into a calm stillness. Inside his office, General Hayes sat alone, his elbows resting on the desk as he studied the reports in front of him. He went over every detail from the mission logs, the medical sheets, and the barracks reports, but nothing explained Emily's bruise. There was no accident recorded. Nothing in the report suggested she had been injured during the field operation. It was as if the mark had appeared out of nowhere. Hayes leaned back in his chair, rubbing his eyes. He had seen combat injuries, training accidents, and even mistakes caused by careless soldiers. But this wasn't any of those. He had known Emily Carter for years. She was cautious, precise, and disciplined. A careless mistake that left a bruise on her face simply didn't fit her. Something else was going on and he needed to find out what. He decided to start by speaking with someone who worked closely with her, Lieutenant Perez, her squad leader. Perez was loyal, experienced, and trustworthy. Hayes waited until the next morning when the lieutenant was available. "Lieutenant," Hayes said quietly, motioning for him to sit. "I need your honest opinion. What do you know about Sergeant Carter's injury?" Perez hesitated. His face tightened, and he avoided the general's gaze. "Sir, it's nothing official," he began slowly. "I don't have proof, but I think she's hiding something. I've seen her flinch, the way she avoids certain people, and last week, there were signs she wasn't safe in the barracks." Hayes leaned forward, his fingers gripping the edge of his desk. "Explain," he said, his voice calm but firm. Perez swallowed and looked uneasy. "I think someone may have hurt her, sir. I suspect it was Corporal Jenkins. He's known to have a short temper, and some soldiers have whispered about him. But Emily has been covering for him. She doesn't want anyone to know what really happened. She's scared. I can't prove it, but I've seen how she avoids him and how tense she becomes around him." Hayes felt a chill run down his spine. Internal violence was one of the worst things in a military unit. It broke trust, morale, and sometimes destroyed lives. He had faced many battles in his career, but seeing one of his own soldiers hurt by someone within their ranks was intolerable. He leaned back and ran a hand through his hair. He had to be careful. If he acted too quickly, he might scare Emily or alert Jenkins. If he waited too long, she might face further harm. But one thing was certain, he couldn't ignore it. Emily's safety was his responsibility, and he wouldn't allow anyone to continue hurting her under his command. The general decided to take immediate steps. First, he discreetly ordered a review of all personnel records and recent complaints. He wanted to know everything about Jenkins, his behavior, his history, and any previous incidents of aggression. Hayes also planned to move Emily to temporary safe quarters under the supervision of a female officer. She didn't need to feel alone or vulnerable in the meantime. Despite these plans, Hayes knew he couldn't force Emily to talk. She was strong, disciplined, and fiercely independent. She had survived difficult missions, and he suspected she could survive this too, even though it was unfair to put that burden on her. He understood why she might hide the truth, fear of shame, judgment, or retaliation. But he also knew that someone who could face battle after battle and still lead her team deserved protection and support, not secrecy. Later that day, Hayes watched Emily from a distance during a routine training exercise. She moved with her usual precision, giving commands quietly and clearly, her focus unwavering. But he noticed the way she occasionally glanced over her shoulder, the small tightness in her posture, and the slight hesitation in her steps. Every movement confirmed his suspicion. Emily was trying to survive while hiding something dangerous. As the day ended and the sun began to set, Hayes quietly reflected on the situation. Emily was one of his best soldiers, someone who had proven her courage and skill repeatedly. Yet here she was, facing a threat not from the enemy but from someone within her own ranks. It wasn't just unfair, it was unacceptable. He decided to take a careful approach. He would gather evidence first, ensure Emily's safety, and then confront the situation directly. But one thing was clear. He would not let her face this alone. Someone needed to act, and it would be him. The thought of Emily hiding her pain while others ignored it angered him. He knew that true leadership wasn't just about commanding soldiers in battle. It was about protecting them when they were vulnerable, even from those they trusted. That evening, Emily returned to her bunk, exhausted from the day. She sat quietly, staring at her reflection in the mirror. The bruise on her face still stood out, a constant reminder of what she had endured. She had hoped no one would notice, that she could continue as if nothing had happened. But she knew better now. General Hayes had seen it, and his concern made her feel a mixture of fear and hope. In his office, Hayes reviewed his plans again. He would speak to Jenkins soon, and he would make sure Emily was safe in the meantime. Every step needed to be calculated, precise, and protective. This wasn't just about discipline, it was about justice and care for one of his own. The night grew darker, and the base fell silent. Outside, The flag swayed gently in the wind, as if silently acknowledging the gravity of the situation. Inside, two minds were occupied. One, determined to protect and uncover the truth, and the other, quietly bearing pain while struggling with fear. Though they had not spoken openly about it, the connection between them had begun. Hayes understood that Emily's silence was a shield, and Emily realized that someone had noticed her hidden struggle. The events of this night would set the stage for what was to come. Hayes knew the investigation wouldn't be easy, and Emily knew that revealing the truth could change everything. But one thing was certain: the general was determined to act, and Emily was no longer entirely alone. The first step toward confronting the danger had been taken, and the tension between secrecy and protection began to build, shaping the story that was unfolding in the quiet shadows of Fort Lancaster. The next morning, the base felt tense, even though outwardly everything seemed normal. Soldiers went about their routines, cleaning equipment and performing maintenance, but there was an undercurrent of anticipation that only a few could sense. General Hayes had made a decision overnight. He wouldn't wait any longer to confront the person responsible for Emily's injuries. Justice and protection for his soldier had to come first, no matter how uncomfortable or complicated it might be. He called Corporal Jenkins to his office. Jenkins walked in, unaware of the storm waiting for him behind the closed door. He looked smug, confident, as if nothing could touch him. That confidence would soon meet the weight of authority. Hayes didn't waste time on pleasantries. "Corporal Jenkins," he said, voice steady but cold, "I need you to explain the bruises on Sergeant Carter's face." Jenkins blinked, trying to mask his surprise with a smirk. "Bruises? What are you talking about, sir?" he replied, his tone casual but defensive. Hayes didn't move, didn't flinch. He studied Jenkins carefully, the slight twitch in his jaw, the quick glance toward the door, the way his fingers fidgeted with the edges of his uniform. Hayes had seen these signs countless times before. Guilt. He spoke slowly, deliberately, letting every word carry authority. "Don't lie to me, Corporal. I've been in this service for decades. I know when someone is hiding the truth. Those bruises were not from training. Someone hurt her. You know what happened." Jenkins opened his mouth to reply, but no words came. The general's eyes were like steel. He could see the tension in the corporal's body, the nervous shifting of weight, the way his hands tightened at his sides. "You think the uniform hides who you are?" Hayes continued, voice rising slightly, but controlled. "You disgrace the flag you wear. You disgrace every soldier who puts their life on the line. And you think no one will notice your actions." The room fell silent, the tension thick enough to cut with a knife. Jenkins finally muttered, I didn't mean," but Hayes cut him off. "You didn't mean to? Bullshit. Injuring a soldier under your own roof, under your own watch is unforgivable. You will face the consequences for this, and you will not harm anyone ever again under my command," Hayes said, each word deliberate and heavy with authority. At that moment, Jenkins realized he had underestimated the general. He had thought he could hide behind his rank, behind the chain of command, but he was wrong. General Hayes was not just a man of discipline, he was a man of justice. He had devoted his life to protecting soldiers, especially those who were vulnerable. Jenkins had crossed a line, and there was no turning back. Hayes immediately initiated a formal internal investigation. Orders were sent to review every detail of Jenkins' behavior, past complaints, and interactions with other soldiers. He didn't want to leave anything to chance. While the investigation would run its course, he also took immediate steps to protect Emily. She was moved to temporary quarters supervised by a female officer, ensuring she had safety and privacy. The general then went to speak with Emily. She had stayed in her room, quiet and tense, aware that something serious was happening. Hayes knocked lightly on her door. "Sergeant Carter," he said, entering. "You are safe now. I've taken measures to ensure that nothing happens to you. You have my word." Emily felt a rush of relief, mixed with a flicker of fear. She had always been taught to handle her own problems, but now someone in power was actively working to protect her. For the first time in days, she allowed herself to relax slightly, though the memory of the injury still burned in her mind. Over the next few hours, word spread quietly among senior officers that an investigation had been launched. Soldiers noticed the sudden tension, and many speculated about what had happened. But Hayes kept the details private, respecting Emily's privacy and the seriousness of the situation. He didn't want gossip to reach the wrong ears. Meanwhile, Emily reflected on the morning's events. She realized how much courage it had taken the general to confront Jenkins directly. In her mind, she had prepared herself to hide, to endure silently, but Hayes had stepped in with authority and empathy. His actions made her feel valued, seen, and protected. For the first time in a long while, she didn't feel entirely alone. Jenkins, on the other hand, was left to contemplate the weight of his actions. He had expected to be ignored, to slip by as he often had before. But the general's presence, the cold authority in Hayes' voice, and the knowledge that Emily was now under protection shattered his confidence. He understood that this was not just a personal confrontation. It was a message to the entire base. Harming another soldier would never be tolerated. That afternoon, Hayes walked through the barracks, keeping a close eye on Emily. She moved carefully, but she no longer carried the same tension in her shoulders. She had witnessed the general act decisively, and it gave her a sense of security she hadn't felt in days. Soldiers whispered to each other about the investigation, but no one dared approach Emily with questions or comments. Respect, for the first time, replaced speculation. By evening, Hayes sat at his desk again, reviewing the files on Jenkins. The corporal's history showed minor incidents, but nothing had ever escalated to this level before. That made Hayes' task both easier and harder. Easier because he had a clear target, but harder because it was clear that the system had not prevented someone like Jenkins from harming a soldier under his command. As night fell, Emily sat in her bunk, feeling a strange mix of relief and exhaustion. The bruises on her face still reminded her of what she had endured, but now they were also symbols of resilience. She had survived, and someone had noticed, not just anyone but the general who cared enough to act. Across the base, Hayes closed his office door and took a deep breath. He knew the investigation would take time, and that justice would not be immediate. But he also knew that the first step had been taken. The person responsible had been confronted, Emily was safe, and the base had been reminded of a simple truth. Discipline alone wasn't enough. Protection and justice were essential. That night, the weight of responsibility rested on both of them in different ways. Emily could finally begin to process what had happened and gather strength, while Hayes prepared for the next steps of the investigation. The confrontation had changed the dynamic on the base, setting the stage for a story of courage, resilience, and the power of leadership that would resonate long after that day. Both Emily and the general now understood a crucial fact. Real courage wasn't just about surviving missions or following orders. It was about standing up for what was right, even when it was hard, dangerous, or uncomfortable. And that morning, a clear line had been drawn, ensuring that justice and protection would prevail over fear and silence. Days passed quietly on the base, but for Emily Carter, each one felt heavy. She had returned to her routines, checked her gear, supervised her squad, and attended briefings, but inside, her thoughts never rested. The bruises on her face were fading slowly, yet they reminded her of the danger she had narrowly escaped. Her interactions with other soldiers were cautious. Some looked at her differently now, sensing something had happened, even if they didn't know the details. Yet despite the fear and uncertainty, one thought kept circling in her mind. General Hayes had acted. For the first time in days, Emily felt a small spark of hope. Hayes had confronted Jenkins, ensured her temporary safety, and initiated an investigation. But still, she couldn't bring herself to speak openly about what had happened. Fear and pride kept her silent. She had always been strong, independent, and capable. Speaking about the attack might make her feel weak, vulnerable, or even pitted. She didn't want that. One late evening, as the sun dipped behind the hills and the sky turned orange and pink, she found herself outside the general's office. She had been cleaning her gear but kept glancing toward the building. Something inside told her it was time. The weight of hiding the truth was exhausting, and she knew she couldn't carry it alone forever. Tentatively, she knocked on the door. "Come in," came Hayes' calm voice. Emily entered, her steps quiet but deliberate. She stood before him, straight-backed, trying to maintain her composure. Hayes gestured for her to sit, though he remained standing. There was no anger in his eyes, no judgment, only patience and concern. "You wanted to speak, Sergeant?" he asked, his voice gentle. Emily swallowed, her throat tight. "Yes, sir. I need to tell you something." She began slowly, carefully. Her voice trembled at first, but grew steadier as she continued. She told him everything. How Jenkins had threatened her, how the bruises had formed, and how she had hidden it from others out of fear. She spoke of the sleepless nights, the anxiety, and the feeling of being unsafe in a place that should have been secure. Hayes listened quietly, without interruption. He didn't flinch, didn't show shock or anger outwardly, though inside, his heart was heavy. He knew her story would be difficult to hear, but he also knew it was essential. Listening was his first act of protection. He let her words fill the room, giving her the space to speak freely. When she finished, a silence fell over the office. Emily's eyes were red, but there was a sense of relief in them too. She had expected judgment, perhaps disappointment, but Hayes only looked at her with a mixture of sorrow and respect. Slowly, he took a deep breath and said softly, "You're still alive after all that?" Emily blinked, caught off guard by the question. Her lips parted, but no words came immediately. Hayes continued, his voice gentle yet firm. "You're stronger than anyone I've ever known. You faced fear that most soldiers would never survive, and you endured it quietly. That takes courage." Tears began to form in Emily's eyes. For the first time in a long while, someone had acknowledged not just the pain she had suffered, but the strength it had taken to survive it. The words struck deeply. Hayes wasn't offering pity. He wasn't treating her like a victim. He was recognizing her resilience, her bravery, and her unwavering courage. Emily felt a weight lift from her shoulders. The fear that had clung to her like a shadow began to loosen. She realized that she didn't have to carry the burden alone anymore. Hayes had acted decisively to protect her, and now he had given her the reassurance that she wasn't powerless. Hayes continued, speaking calmly but with emotion. "I know it wasn't easy to come forward. I know you've tried to be strong, to handle this by yourself. But you're not alone, Emily. You never have been. And you never will be, not on my watch." The words felt like a shield around her. She had faced battles in the field, endured hardship, and led her team under extreme stress. But this moment, the recognition and support from someone she respected, was a battle of a different kind. It was a victory over fear and silence. Emily wiped her tears, a faint smile forming. "Thank you, sir," she whispered. I just didn't know what to do. I wanted to handle it myself." "You were handling it, yes," Hayes replied. "But courage doesn't mean facing everything alone. Sometimes true courage is knowing when to ask for help and who to trust. And today you've done that." For the rest of the evening, they spoke quietly about the steps being taken to ensure her safety. Hayes explained that the investigation into Jenkins would continue, that her living quarters were secure, and that she would receive support from trusted officers and counselors. Emily felt a sense of security settle over her. She realized she could begin to breathe again, to focus on her recovery, and to regain the sense of control that had been stolen from her. As she left the office that night, Emily walked back to her bunk with her head held higher than she had in days. The bruise on her cheek was still visible, but it no longer defined her. The fear that had followed her everywhere had been replaced with a quiet confidence and hope. She had spoken her truth, been heard, and found an ally in someone she respected deeply. That night, as she lay in bed, Emily thought about the words the general had said. "You're stronger than anyone I've ever known." She repeated them to herself, letting the meaning sink in. Strength wasn't just surviving missions or hiding pain. Strength was enduring, asking for help when needed, and continuing to move forward despite fear. Meanwhile, Hayes reviewed the reports again in his office. He knew the process was not over. Justice would take time, but he felt a quiet satisfaction. Emily had broken her silence, and he had ensured she would not face her struggles alone. He knew that leadership wasn't just about giving orders. It was about listening, protecting, and guiding those who trusted you. In the days that followed, Emily carried herself differently. She moved with a renewed sense of purpose, her interactions with her team stronger and more confident. Soldiers who had previously overlooked her courage began to notice her strength in a new light. The general's recognition had not only validated her experience but had inspired those around her to see the power of resilience and quiet bravery. This moment, Emily speaking her truth, Hayes listening, and both recognizing courage in its purest form, would remain a turning point in her life. It marked the beginning of healing, the restoration of trust, and the start of a bond between soldier and leader that went beyond orders and discipline. It was a story of courage, understanding, and human connection that would resonate far beyond the walls of the office where it began. The morning sun rose over Fort Lancaster, casting long golden rays across the training grounds. The base was alive with movement as soldiers went about their routines, cleaning, maintaining vehicles, and preparing for the day's exercises. But something was different today. There was a quiet tension, a subtle awareness in the air. The events of the past week, the confrontation, the bruises, the investigation, had left a mark on the soldiers, even if they didn't fully understand it. Sergeant Emily Carter walked through the compound with her head held high. Her uniform was neat, her movements precise, but the bruise on her cheek still remained, a faint reminder of the ordeal she had endured. Despite this, she carried herself with confidence, and a quiet determination emanated from her. The soldiers around her noticed it. Those who had once overlooked her courage now paused, watching her with respect. Even the younger recruits, who had only heard whispers of what had happened, could feel the shift. General Hayes had called for an assembly. It wasn't a routine gathering. It was a moment that would become historic in the lives of the soldiers present. One by one, soldiers lined up, boots clicking against the gravel, standing at attention as the general stepped onto the podium. His presence commanded respect, but today, there was a visible emotion behind his usually composed expression. He looked at the troops, scanning the faces he had known for years, before his eyes settled on Emily. "She stands among you not just as a soldier," Hayes began, his voice carrying across the grounds, "but as a symbol of true courage." His eyes softened as they met Emily's, who straightened instinctively, her heart pounding. Courage isn't only about facing bullets or surviving missions. Courage is also about standing up when others try to break you, when fear tries to silence you, and when the world tests every part of your strength. A hush fell over the crowd. Soldiers exchanged glances, some whispering quietly, others simply standing in awe of the moment. Emily felt a lump in her throat, but she forced herself to breathe steadily. The general continued, his voice filled with emotion. Sergeant Carter faced challenges that no soldier should have to endure, yet she endured them with quiet strength, dignity, and bravery. She survived, she persisted, and she never gave up. "This," he said, gesturing toward her, "is what strength truly looks like." As he spoke, a wave of emotion passed through the assembly. Some soldiers blinked rapidly, trying to hold back tears. The story wasn't just about Emily's pain. It was about resilience, about facing adversity and standing tall despite it. Hayes had recognized not only her survival but the courage it had taken to keep moving forward, to hide her fear while continuing to perform her duties. Emily felt warmth spread through her chest. She had faced the fear, the pain, and the uncertainty alone for days, but now, she was not alone. The general's words validated her struggle, and the respect of her peers, earned silently over years of dedication and quiet bravery, was finally recognized. For the first time in a long while, she allowed herself to feel proud, not just of surviving but of enduring with dignity. Hayes looked around the assembly once more, his gaze firm but gentle. "Let this be a lesson to all of us," he said. "No one should endure suffering in silence. True leadership is about protecting those under your command. True strength is about standing up for what is right, even when it is difficult or uncomfortable. Sergeant Carter has taught us all that lesson today. As the speech ended, Emily felt tears prick her eyes. The soldiers around her, some of whom had been distant or indifferent in the past, now looked at her with admiration. Even those who had doubted her abilities now understood her strength. Not because of her physical prowess, but because of her courage, her perseverance, and her integrity. After the assembly, many soldiers came forward quietly, offering nods of respect or soft words of support. Some hesitated, unsure of what to say, but their presence alone mattered. Emily realized that this moment had shifted the way they saw her, and perhaps the way they saw courage itself. Later, Hayes approached her privately, placing a hand on her shoulder. "You've changed this base, Emily," he said quietly, his voice filled with sincerity. "Not just through your actions, but through your strength. You've reminded everyone what it means to be brave." Emily looked up at him, her eyes shining with unshed tears. "Thank you, sir," she whispered. I just tried to do what I had to." "That's exactly it," Hayes replied, smiling faintly. "You did more than that. You showed the rest of us what courage looks like in real life. And that's something no one can ever take away from you." In the days that followed, the atmosphere on the base shifted. Soldiers who had once been indifferent now treated Emily with a new level of respect. She began to mentor younger recruits, quietly teaching them lessons about resilience, integrity, and courage. Her story spread not as gossip, but as a source of inspiration. New soldiers arriving at Fort Lancaster were told of her bravery, not as an extraordinary tale of combat, but as an example of enduring personal trials with dignity and strength. Emily herself began to feel a sense of healing. The fear and anxiety that had haunted her after the attack gradually faded, replaced by a quiet confidence and inner strength. She had faced danger, injustice, and pain, yet she had endured. And now, she had earned the recognition of someone she deeply respected, along with the admiration of those she served alongside. The general's words continued to echo in her mind. "This is what strength looks like." That simple statement carried more weight than any medal or commendation. It was a reminder that courage wasn't just about fighting on the battlefield. It was about surviving, enduring, and standing tall when life tried to break you. By the time the sun set over the base, Emily Carter felt a renewed sense of purpose. She knew that her experience had changed not only her but the entire unit. Her strength had inspired others, her courage had set an example, and her resilience had become a quiet beacon of hope. That morning's assembly had been more than a recognition, it had been a turning point. For Emily, for the soldiers who had witnessed her journey, and for the general who had guided her, it was a reminder that bravery takes many forms. Sometimes, it's found in the heat of battle, and sometimes, it's found in the quiet endurance of personal trials. Emily Carter had survived, endured, and inspired. And on that morning at Fort Lancaster, everyone saw the true meaning of courage for the very first time. After the intense events at Fort Lancaster, life slowly began to settle back into routine, but nothing was quite the same. Sergeant Emily Carter had faced fear, pain, and betrayal, and she had endured it all with quiet courage. The bruise on her cheek had faded, but the memories of those days stayed with her, reminding her of both her vulnerability and her strength. She now walked with a new confidence, a sense of purpose that went beyond simply performing her duties. She had survived something that could have broken her, and she had come out stronger. Her role on the base began to change as well. Soldiers who had once treated her as just another member of the unit now looked to her for guidance. They saw not only a capable soldier but someone who had faced danger, both visible and hidden, and had persevered. Emily began to mentor younger female recruits, sharing lessons about courage, resilience, and self-respect. She helped them understand that strength was not only about physical skill but also about protecting oneself, speaking up when necessary, and refusing to be silenced by fear. Meanwhile, Corporal Jenkins faced the consequences of his actions. The investigation launched by General Hayes had uncovered the truth. He was court-martialed and discharged dishonorably. The base officers were careful to make it clear that no soldier would be tolerated harming another, and the chain of command reinforced the message. Abuse, harassment, or violence within the ranks was completely unacceptable. Jenkins' removal sent a strong signal across the base, one that reassured Emily and the other soldiers that their safety and dignity were priorities. General Hayes, now retired, occasionally visited the base to check on the well-being of soldiers like Emily. He had taken her story personally because he saw in her not just a soldier, but a person of extraordinary courage. He often reflected on the day he first noticed her bruise and how he had realized that the challenge she faced was more than physical. It was personal, emotional, and deeply unfair. He had acted not just as a commanding officer, but as a protector and mentor, showing that leadership was about responsibility and humanity, not just orders and discipline. Years later, Emily was recognized formally for her courage. A ceremony was held at Fort Lancaster, attended by soldiers, officers, and retired personnel. As she stood on the podium, medals pinned to her uniform, she felt a deep sense of accomplishment. Her journey had not been easy. It had been filled with fear, silence, and endurance. But standing there, being honored, validated every step she had taken to survive and protect herself. Among the audience, General Hayes watched quietly, a proud smile on his face. He leaned down and whispered to her, as he had on that difficult day years earlier, "You're still alive, and because of that, many others will be too." His words reminded Emily of the first time she had broken her silence, the moment she had trusted him with her truth. Those words had stayed with her all this time, becoming a source of strength and reassurance. Emily's story began to inspire more than just the soldiers at Fort Lancaster. Stories of her bravery and perseverance circulated across other units and training programs. She became a symbol of courage, someone who had faced internal danger and come out victorious. New recruits were told her story as a lesson not only in resilience but in the importance of speaking up and relying on leadership when needed. Her experiences demonstrated that courage was more than facing enemies. It was about enduring hardship, protecting oneself, and inspiring others to do the same. As Emily continued her work with new soldiers, she made sure to emphasize a key lesson she had learned the hard way. Seeking help is not a weakness. There is strength in acknowledging one's vulnerability and courage in trusting those who have the authority and the will to protect. Many young recruits, especially women, found comfort and guidance in her presence. She became not only a mentor but a beacon of hope, teaching them that their voices mattered and their safety was important. Emily's personal growth mirrored her professional development. She took on leadership roles within the unit, using her experience to improve policies and support systems for soldiers who might face difficulties similar to hers. Her insights helped commanders recognize signs of distress, and her influence contributed to a culture of accountability and care within the military. What had started as a painful and dangerous experience transformed into a source of learning and empowerment for the entire base. In quiet moments, Emily reflected on the journey she had taken, the pain she had endured, the fear she had felt, and the silence she had carried had all shaped her into someone stronger. She realized that courage was not just about surviving. It was about growing, learning, and helping others to survive as well. And she understood that her experience, difficult as it had been, had a purpose far beyond herself. It had changed the way soldiers saw themselves, each other, and the importance of leadership grounded in compassion. The legacy of her struggle was now visible everywhere she looked. Recruits trained with more awareness, leaders acted with greater care, and the base itself had become a safer, more respectful environment. Emily had turned personal suffering into a source of empowerment for others. Her story became a quiet but powerful testament to the strength of the human spirit. Even years later, when medals were displayed and ceremonies were held, Emily never forgot the first day General Hayes had noticed her bruises. That moment had been the catalyst for her survival, her courage, and her transformation into a figure who inspired others. She realized that while physical scars fade, the lessons of endurance, bravery, and leadership last a lifetime. Sergeant Emily Carter had survived the pain, faced the fear, and emerged not only as a stronger soldier, but as a symbol of hope. Through her story, she had changed the culture around her, influenced countless lives, and proved that courage and resilience could leave a lasting legacy. The bruise that had once marked her vulnerability had become the sign of her enduring strength, inspiring generations of soldiers to come.